If someone sees that we're activated and they begin to do something to try to calm us down, how do we explain what's happening to them? So I'm just gonna put myself in that situation. So if I'm like in a panic attack, which has happened, especially when I'm up high, well, ideally we don't want to wait until the problem, right? We want to wait. We want to do things beforehand and let people know, or whoever it is, hey, if you see me, if you see this happening, this is what I need, or this is what I'm going to do. Here's what you can do, which is like relax or do nothing at all, or just grab my hand or say something that might be helpful. I'm not sure whatever would be helpful for an individual. I think be letting people know ahead of time that we want them to know what's going on. Discussing it ahead of time might be a really good idea. It's kind of like it's just planning things out. So in the moment, if you're aware enough, or if we're aware enough of what's happening within us, hopefully we already know what works for us, and that we can say like, "This is what I need. This is what I need. Like, give me some space, or I need a little squeeze, or whatever it is that helps for people." Yeah, I think that being ahead of time would be a good idea, and then during in the moment, hopefully we know what's going on, and we can say what it is that we need. Yeah. So if we're using tools in front of them, I think it's like we can let them know this is if you want to, or if we want to, that this is what I'm doing, and this is why. I don't need anything out of you. Don't try and solve the problem. I'm good. So if you see me, clenching and releasing my muscles, I'm just dealing with something in the moment, and I'll be all right. That's a much bigger question, though. Is how do we know someone's safe enough to have that conversation? How do we know someone's safe enough to have that conversation? That's a huge question. So as that comes up in therapy, what helps with the people I've worked, the clients that I work with, is it's more about like it's when we reflect on the people who were not safe enough to share that information with. That when we talk about those pieces, that the client can notice they were doing X, Y, and Z, and I didn't realize it in the moment, but now that I'm processing it here in therapy, I can see that they were not someone that I should have trusted. You know what I mean? And so then in therapy, what I do is we'll notice those pieces, those red flags that someone had missed before, and then in therapy, I'll use my relationship with the client as like an example of like, how do you feel right now, and just kind of bring it back to the moment. So in therapy, we can use what's happening in the moment to identify what safety might feel like, and the client will be able to say things like, I feel listened to, I feel cared about, I feel important. And so I'm like, okay, so these are pieces that on the outside of therapy that might that you might feel as well. And they can notice behavioral things like I listen, I'm not talking over them, um, I'm not interjecting my own stories. And so this is therapy, it's different, but the way that it feels in this relationship these are things that might be reflective of safe relationships outside of therapy. It's different. And therapy doesn't extend beyond that hour. It's just that hour per weekish. But it's kind of like, here's where we've been and didn't feel safe. Ultimately, now we know. Here's where we are, and there are pieces here that do feel safe. And if we see those in others, we feel those in our other relationships as they build, then that could be an indicator that the person is more trustworthy. It can be. I mean, it's just general, Red flags. I'm trying not to connect with old script, but see it through new eyes. Using my gut is important. It is. So we were talking about recognizing safe people. Using your gut is important, but if someone exists down the polyvagal ladder, their neuroception is going to be, Dr. Porges calls it faulty neuroception. He's also called it healthy or unhealthy. Like, our ability to detect safety is compromised. So if we're down the ladder, our ability to recognize who's safe is just compromised. Or if we do pick it up and we have that sensation in our gut that someone might not be safe, if we might not be able to be mindfully aware of that sensation because we're in a defensive state. So our capacity to be mindful of like what's happening within us is probably very compromised, or it is. So trusting your gut, yeah. But I think if you're in a safe and social state, you'll be more likely to have accurate neuroception and to be aware of it and then to act on it. So it's like three pieces to it, which is the accurate neuroception, awareness of it, and then acting on it. I think all those kind of have to be present in order to trust your gut and really recognize who's safe or not. Um, Otherwise, I think it's important to have. It can be important to have rules. Like, here's the rules for my relationships right now. As I'm working on myself and doing therapy or whatever, I'm just not going to be seeking out a new relationship right now. Or here's how much I'm willing to share to someone, and here's what's not appropriate. And if we don't have our neuroception, our capacity to recognize what is um, safe or not, trustworthy or not, then having those rules that we just live by, like here's an appropriate amount of me for me to share, and here's what I definitely will not share. Like having those rules can be helpful as we work on our capacity to recognize who's safe. It says check in with them. Do you feel safe? Maybe people might not feel safe enough to self-report accurately. That's always that is always a concern, Virginia. In therapy, is I can ask these things, but yeah, people might not self-report accurately, and yeah, that's a concern. I think generally I do pretty well with building rapport with my clients. Asking for feedback and input is always a part of my session. So at least at the end of the session, I'm always saying, how did this go for you? What went right? What went wrong? Right. But also during the session, I am consistently asking people, how are you feeling right now in the moment? And I'll ask people, I did this intervention. How'd that go for you? How did that feel? So that I try to do the best I can to normalize feedback and input as a part of my therapeutic process, and making sure that my client, as best I can, feels like they're a part of their own therapy, and that we're collaborating instead of me applying some sort of treatment to them. So I really want them to feel like we're working on this together. So, ultimately, do I know if someone is holding back and doesn't feel safe enough? I can't 100% know. My gut says, and the feedback that I get from people, and I feel like I do a pretty good job of that. With the adults, it's easier to tell. With the teenagers, a handful of them, it's really hard to tell, and they probably aren't. I know they're not. I know they're not ultimately disclosing, um, how they feel about therapy or about the relationship with me. Some of them flat out say, like, not they have a problem with me, but they don't like therapy, as it is. And so I'll try and work with them on what therapy can look like. But with teenagers, it's just a lot harder. So is it? Do I feel safe? Yeah. Do they feel safe? I really hope so. I really hope so. And I do the best I can to help them identify how they're feeling in the moment. I do the best I can to make sure that they have access to their safe and social state as I see them losing access to the present moment or to their bodies. Same thing. Um, I do the best I can to bring them back in the present moment and then process for them with them what just happened. That happened on Thursday. I had a session on Thursday, and I was teaching a 16-year-old about the polyvagal ladder because she was interested in it. And I said, all right, so I'm going to teach you this, but just notice what's happening within you, and tell me if you start to feel any old memories come up, or any shifts in your body, anything that is like disconnecting you. She has a very, very shut down energy or lack of energy to her. So we went through the ladder, and I was asking her about it, and I could tell she was just kind of not present. Like she wasn't able to recognize that. And so I asked, like, how are you doing right now? Like I just brought it to her and said, how are you doing right now? What's going on within you? And then she was able to say, I feel myself like disconnecting. And so what I did was, I used a safety anchor for her, something that she didn't know about it yet, but I knew would be a really good safety anchor. And I used that as a way to help her come back in the moment. And we talked about something unrelated, just something just friendly, talked about it. And then I brought her back to, okay, how are you feeling right now? And she was able to notice what was going on within her. And then we compared it to where she was at now. And it's for her, that was an opportunity to notice her own climbing of the ladder in that moment, in a very brief amount of time, from shutdown, a very disconnected shutdown, up into safety and able to make eye contact with me and connect. And so I pointed those pieces out to her, and we had just talked about the polyvagal ladder, so it was a really good opportunity for her to see that, to see it happen, and to notice those shifts within her. So I guess the point here was, do my clients feel safe enough to tell me stuff? I really hope so. I do the best I can. I think they do. But yeah, I don't know. Do I feel safe? Yeah. Everyone got really quiet. What happened here? Was I just so riveting? Thinking about what the rules, okay, what the rules are, boundaries, another way to describe it, or are you talking about something else? What I was referring to was the rules would be what someone allows themselves to do or not to do. And I think the example I came up with was like what's appropriate to share or not share. And so it's like a top down rule. It's just like your brain's coming up with a rule that might help your body to regulate itself in whatever moment and to not overshare or overtrust. That's kind of that's the idea. So the rules can range in what they are, and for some people it might be like there's clients I work with where relationships just haven't gone very well. The people they chose are all wrong, and so the rule they came up with was just like, for right now, it's just not a good idea for me to be in a relationship. And so that could be a rule. For me right now, they could say I tend to overshare, and so recognize, so these stories are off limits. I'm not going to share these stories, or these things that I've been through that I tend to share to people with people, and it always backfires. These stories, these things that I've been through that are traumatic, I'm just going to keep these to myself for now. I'm not going to tell anybody else besides maybe my therapist, or maybe there are a couple of people in their lives that they really can trust. But when I meet somebody new, these certain stories are off limits. That could be a rule. Do you know what I mean? So if someone doesn't feel like they can navigate that process and trust their gut, then having those top down rules, I think could be helpful. Like, this is just off limits. I'm not going to do this.